And welcome back to the Breaking Zone. It's kind of it was a little sing-songy.
I like it.
We need to talk about Marc Marquez. Like this was, spoiler, he won. For anybody who was on the fence, if they didn't know he was going to win, he won.
If you've gotten through the week till you get to our podcast in the week and you didn't know, then you're probably not much of a MotoGP fan at that point.
I thought it would be really fun to, everyone's going to analyze his writings and everything like that. I thought it would be fun to just kind of talk about how we have perceived Marquez through the years, because my opinion of him has changed dramatically. And I think before we even get into that, I just really want to say that, you and I have both lived through like Michael Jordan and these other just incredible comebacks. This is the most incredible comeback in sport history. And that's remarkable. We've got a lot of comments from people saying, oh, I'm not having fun watching MotoGP this year because the same guy keeps winning. But what is it? This is the longest anybody has ever gone between winning a championship or winning a title. And that is remarkable.
It's the longest anyone's gone between championship wins in MotoGP. I think he has either the current or the second longest streak between first win and latest win. And who knows because it's 13 years that he's been winning championships. So who knows, he might continue to keep winning more and more. I do think that's an interesting question. Like our fan opinion of Marquez over the years is an interesting one. Why don't you go ahead and start?
When he first showed up, he was winning everything kind of like this year. And I think he went the first 8 or 9 rounds undefeated. And I remember thinking
that it was his second season, 2014, when he won 10 or 11 in a row. I think it was 10 in a row.
Okay, right. Okay, his second season. And watching that second season, I remember thinking or hoping, is he going to have a perfect season? It's never been done. And you're like, holy cow, he's winning everything. He's unstoppable. Is he going? Like, I was really excited about it. And then he didn't. And then he kind of went on this brash. He was just like a kid and aggressive. And I thought he was too aggressive. He caused a lot of crashes. He punted a lot of people off the track. You could watch him aim for people's swing arm pivots to get him to bobble and pass him. They made a whole bunch of rules in MotoGP just to kind of curtail some of his behavior. He was the first one that would go slow during qualifying to get a tow. Nobody was really doing that before him. And then they had to make all these rules for him. So it went from when he first showed up, like, oh my gosh, this rookie, holy cow, this kid's amazing, to I was really frustrated with him for a long time. I didn't like his conduct. And then you have the Rossi incident, right? And I was like, oh, come on. Like, Rossi was not a fair player either, right? Like, but you could see, like, when Marquez slowed down and then caused the problem again, you're just like, this is not what I like about this sport. I don't like this. And then he has his injury. And you're like, okay, well, I guess he's gone. And now that he's come back, I think he's come back as a completely different person. Like, I think his maturity, his kindness, any interview from anybody who knows him, they don't have a bad thing to say about him, that he's not obsessed with money. He's not obsessed with a lot of the materialistic things. He loves the paddock. He loves the sport. He's unbelievably kind to his crew. He's kind of like, I just love this arc. I just love this character arc from like this brash, reckless kid to now like a real genuinely kind guy. And not even talking about like pulling off the track to render aid to Morbidelli, which is, again, like, just speaks so highly to where his character is and what his character is. And I think, maybe it's boring that he's winning all these races, but to see this arc and this comeback, the injury and and then watching him, I got a little choked up watching him win today, and he's like crying, and it was so like, he wasn't like celebrating in bravado. He's like, this cost me so much, and here I am. And it's just been an amazing. You watch MotoGP for the story. This has been a hell of a story.
It's hard to argue with rooting for him at the end. I think even if during the 2015 era, that incident, even if you were hardcore on the Rossi side of the fence, if you've been watching this whole time since then, the last 10 years, I think it is hard not to have a soft spot or have softened at least your opinion of Marquez as seeing the human side of what he's been through. You covered a lot in your 5 minutes of Marquez history. There's a lot to dive into.
Well, there is it's a lot there, yeah,
There's
and
a lot
it's
there.
Yeah, and I skimmed it just to kind of give like a bird's eye, broad brush picture of it.
I think the first time when it really was apparent. So he won his 125 championship, and then he went to Moto 2. But we'd seen 125 champions go to Moto 2 and struggle or do well, but then never quite get beyond that. I can still remember when he went to Moto 2 and he was like that young version of him in MotoGP. He was even more so in Moto 2. It was more reckless. It was more ragged edge. It was more aggressive everywhere he could be. But in Moto 2, I think you get a little more slack in that sense because Moto 2, they know all these are young kids and they are aggressive and they are trying to get to the front of a really cutthroat race series. But the moment it always stands out to me for Marquez in Moto 2 was, and I actually think it was Motegi, funny enough, his second Moto 2 season, he stalled it. I think he either stalled it or he was in neutral off the line, the starting line. Basically gets away from the starting line dead last, like by a mile dead last. And I think if you go on YouTube and find the replay of Marquez Moto 2 Motegi, watch the replay of his start, because I think within 4 laps, he carved through about 20 people on track. And it was phenomenal to watch. And they were precise. He didn't hit anybody. They were clean passes everywhere. But he was just so clearly on another level that was sort of the moment when it was, oh, this is not like the other riders. This one's special. He got to MotoGP and was sort of the, I think, kind of lovable character when he was a rookie, because everyone was like, look at how much fun he's having on the bike, and he is just a phenomenal talent. Because even in the very early days, 13, 14, it was like Rossi was little brother kind of thing. You know, you'd see they'd be on the podium together after a battle, and Rossi would kind of do a little headlock and like kind of mess with them, and they were buddies and they were racing together, having a great time. And then once it became clear that, oh, this guy's challenging me, and now there's a pecking order kind of thing going on with it, that's when the tables very much turned with the two of those. But yeah, the 2013, 2014 version of him was unreal. Literally, we'd never seen anything quite like Marquez in his first couple of seasons. He did crash a lot, but he did some truly unbelievable things on a bike that no one had seen since before that or since. But yeah, he really was doing phenomenal things that we had just never seen done on a bike before. The 2015 incident is weird. Should we dive down a rabbit hole with this for a second?
Okay. Because I think for so many people, it was that moment that was like, for me, it was like everybody loved Rossi. And of course, Rossi did the same things. Nobody's saying Rossi's innocent in this, or I'm sure some people are, but like, but if you're paying attention, it takes two to tango, right? Yep. But that was, for me, it was kind of the last straw. It's like, oh my gosh, enough. Because at that point in time, a bunch of the other more mature riders like Dovizioso had pulled him aside and are like, hey, you got to stop doing this. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get us hurt. Our careers are finite. Stop. And, let's dive into it. Like, what's your perspective on that?
So the 2015 incident is an interesting one, because I think we all think about Sepang as the incident. And Sepang was sort of the culmination of it. But there was lead up. And the lead up's the part I think that we gloss over now when we look back on it. And if you remember, it was in the press conference leading up, in Sepang press conferences on like the Thursday, Friday press conference, where Rossi was basically saying, Marquez is sitting at the table with him. Marquez is trying to ruin this championship. He's trying to steal it from me. And he's making all these pretty wild and bold accusations that I can remember the press conference, people laughed at first, including Marquez, because they all thought he was just messing with him, and it was kind of a gag at first. And then it became clear that Rossi was dead serious about this sort of conspiracy idea that he'd had, that, Marquez and Lorenzo were basically colluding to steal this championship from him. And I remember seeing Marquez's face, because you could tell it's an Italian speaking English and it's a Spaniard listening to English. And there was a gap where Marquez was like, am I understanding what you're saying to me right now and to this group? And he had no idea how to react to it. He was baffled that was the take. And it stemmed from the prior race in Australia. And I have since gone back and rewatched the Australia race. It is an excellent race, by the way. If you want to go watch a good race, Australia 2015 is a damn good race. But he accused basically Marquez of intentionally screwing with him in the race in order to support Lorenzo. If you go watch the race, I promise that will not be your takeaway. It was certainly not mine. And I'm not necessarily a Marquez fan or a Rossi fan, but I don't think anybody left the race thinking, oh, Marquez is out to get him, obviously, because Marquez went and beat Lorenzo in the race. So that doesn't really bode, So anyway, it all kind of stemmed from these earlier things of Rossi making these kind of wild accusations. And the news at the time in 2015, Rossi was as good as the Pope, right? Like if Rossi said it, the news and everybody was like, well, clearly that's the truth. And Marquez felt very personally attacked by it. So then they go into Sepang, and Marquez is like, all right, fine. I guess if I'm here to mess with your race, I guess let's do it. Let's race. And so, then the race unfolds, and for sure they were racing each other very hard. They were making very aggressive passes, and they were effectively just slowing each other up. There were several times where Rossi looked back at Marquez sort of like, leave me alone. I need to go fight for my championship now. And Marquez was just not having it, and he would just stick it right back in again as soon as he could. And then, of course, it led to the crash and all the fallout from that. But it stemmed from prior to that, Rossi making some accusations that I genuinely, if you go watch the race, I think you'd struggle to come away from that race with that impression.
So with 10 years since that incident, I think looking back at it now, to me, it feels more like the Art and Senna moment, right? Where Art and Senna gets in his car and is like, okay, fine. And I think that's part of the racer mentality. And it speaks, not just to, Marquez or Rossi, but how competitive these people are. You're going to throw down? All right. Let's see who comes out on top. This is the living that they do. And it's, I don't know. You get a little nostalgic and romantic now about Art and Senna, and I think we will soon about Marquez. Hopefully we don't lose him like we lost Art and Senna. But yeah, I think he's that level of just like, where did this talent come from? Like, how is he able to do things that nobody else can do? Like the number of times he's saved a front end slide and recovered and kept going. Like some riders do that once or twice in a career. Mm-hmm. He'll do it once or twice in a weekend.
In a session. Yeah.
Session.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely remarkable. Yeah, the racing might be boring because he's so dominant, but it's also, we are watching something absolutely spectacular. And I am really interested to see what's going to happen over the next 2 seasons. Obviously, he's going to be on Ducati next year, but there's already like rumors swirling around what's going to happen when we go to 800s. Is he going to end up on a different bike and whatever? Because he has the talent, he has the hunger, And here's the other thing: Rossi has seven MotoGP championships. So does Marquez. I don't think Rossi's going to win another one.
Right?
How many more is Marquez? Because I think doesn't Agostini have 8?
9.
He has 9. He has 9.
Yep.
And so yeah, I think it's highly probable that Marquez will dethrone Agostini for the most MotoGP championships. I don't want to put the cart before the horse, but it just seems like there's still so much there.
Yeah, and I thought about this too, because you walk away from this season, so there's 5 rounds left. We're only 3/4 of the way through the season, and
he's
it's wrapped
200 points ahead of 200 points with 5 rounds left to go.
What will be interesting is at the end of the season to see where Alex lands in points, because you can basically backtrack and say, yes, it was mathematically locked in at Motegi, but when did he actually win the championship? Basically, when did he have enough points that it didn't matter to that? But yeah, so I think whenever you see it, whenever we watch somebody win a championship, they are immediately the favorite for the next season, obviously. But it's very often that the champion does not win again after that, or the next season anyway. So I think we come away from this and Marquez seems imperious, like he is just going to keep walking over the field forever, it seems like. But there will be a day when he isn't the fastest guy out there anymore, and you never know when that day is going to be. It might be next season. It might be in 5 years. You never know until it happens.
And most people's hunger gets satiated at some point.
Mm-hmm.
At what point is he like, you know what? This was a lot of work to do this. He says something really interesting in the post-race interview where he said he came back too soon after his big crash in 2018, 2019. 2020. I came back too soon. And that set me back all of this. And so he had to prove to himself that he could come back. And I wonder, like, because he is affable, I mean, he's obviously unbelievably competitive, but will he just be like, okay, I'm good now? You know?
It doesn't seem like it.
It doesn't seem like it. And I think because of the whole Rossi incident, you could see, like, I'm going to get one more than him, you know?
If he needs no other motivation than that, yeah.
Right, because I don't know if you notice if you watch the pregame show, I always do, the last round in Italy, Rossi walked by and Marquez walked by, and
not a glance.
It's like they didn't even know each other. Like they didn't even like glance towards each other's. So there's obviously still some bad blood
pretty
there.
cold still.
Yeah. Where I was like pretty happy to see Rossi and Stoner have like a good little chat but I think, not to get too sidetracked with Rossi, but I think his biggest weakness is that he would get hung up on a single rider and become a little obsessed about him to his own detriment. And I think it hurt his career more than once. Marquez was just probably like the last one and the most famous one.
Well, and I think it's, if we're going to go down a Rossi tangent for a second, it's probably because every other opponent Rossi had ever picked, he was able to beat them in every way. He beat them in the public eye. He beat them on the racetrack. He beat
Biaggi,
Gibana, like everybody, he was basically able to kind of stomp over and not only did he beat them, he made it look like they were the bad guy. And again, I'm not trying to say that he's always spinning stuff, but he always came out on top, regardless of how you look at it.
Well, and to underpin that story, I was working for the Olympics in 2002 when they came through Salt Lake City, Winter Olympics, and a little old Italian couple came through for some reason. I'm like, oh, Italia, Valentino Rossi. This little old lady, like 75 if she was a day. She goes, Valentino Rossi. Yeah, see, Valentino Rossi. Max Biaggi, no good.
Yeah.
Max Biaggi, no good. And you're like, that was the perception across the board, right? Because you're right. Rossi was good at the marketing side of things, and he marketed himself at that way very effectively.
Yeah.
Now, we all kind of thought, oh, maybe Max Biaggi is no good, but now the way Max Biaggi conducts himself in the paddock. No, he's like more Marquez than he's very kind. He's generous. He's very affable. He talks with fans at length.
And who's to say, like, as people age, as we all do, you tend to get a little softer and a little kinder and a little more retrospective. And so who knows the actual truth, but definitely whatever it was, Rossi always managed to be the hero of the story, and he was great at that part. But then Marquez was the first time where it kind of all came to a head, and you aren't necessarily the fastest guy on the track anymore, and so forth. So that was a big shift, and I don't think Rossi's ever let that go. Essentially,
undoubtedly, he's not let that go, nor will he ever.
Yeah.
And it's really fun to listen to interviews from racers who are long since passed. Right? Like I've had the opportunity to interview Freddie Spencer. I've listened to other interviews with other former racers, and you feel like you get more of the true story years later when they've kind of mellowed out.
Yeah.
Kevin Schwantz, he just lives up in Idaho, and he's done a bunch of interviews lately. And if find him and look up some of the recent interviews with him, because right now I guess he's into trophy trucks and his dogs. Yeah. So he's building, but he'll talk about these things, and he talks about his competitors now with great kindness and affection, where when he was still racing, you thought they would get into a bar brawl if they were in the same pub together.
It's probably better that there wasn't a camera in everyone's. No one was walking around with cameras in their pocket all the time, because there probably was a lot of more colorful activity back then.
Like him and Wayne Rainey had like epic battles, and like now to talk, like they hang out together and which is awesome, right? Like think about it. These people share so much in common, right?
Let's get back to the Motegi weekend a little bit.
Yes, before like waxing philosophical about the history of racing.
So I think the overriding narrative is obviously Marquez winning his championship, and I loved all of that. I loved watching him win. I loved watching him get emotional about it. I loved the line he said in the interview that he was at peace with Marc. I think that was his terms. Was he was sort of like, I'm at peace with, not with myself. He didn't say myself. He said, I'm at peace with Marc, because he can tell that there's sort of these two halves of him that are always kind of fighting. And I like the way that he framed that. And you can maybe say, oh, that's a little bit of lost in translation, but I think it came across as he wanted it. But it almost unfortunately, his win overshadowed Bagnaia's performance.
Right. Out of nowhere, I was so excited. You texted me, and it's Japan, right? So you texted me like at 11 o'clock at night. Did you watch Free Practice 1? And I'm like, I'm just about to, and I think you said to me, the last person you expect is going to come in first.
Oh, I said, who's the last person you expect to be fastest in the session? Yeah. And you said Somket Chantra.
Yeah.
And I was like, good second guess. Bagnaia. And yeah.
And he was dominant all weekend.
Great from the go.
He's strong on this track. And this is a weird track. This track is more like Spielberg it's a very braking intense track. But apparently they figured out, because that's where he's been struggling all year, is on the brakes. So they figured out something with the front end of that bike. And I was delighted to see him see the Pecco we know and love out there being competitive. And it was awesome. And I hope we can continue down that road.
So I was thrilled at how he did. Exact same. It was so great to see him in qualifying with the body language and just the aggressiveness that he had in qualifying, how much confidence he had on the front tire coming into corners. It's like, oh, that's the Pecco I wanted to see all season. That's where he is. And he looked great. He had, and all I can say is like, it's this aggression that he moved with that we just haven't seen for the last 7 or 8 rounds now, if not more. So that was great to see. I want to come back to what happened. How did this change? But I want to finish a little bit on Motegi Force for him. What did you think when you're watching the race and he's clearly going to win? Marquez is settled into second. It looks like it's just going to click off the laps. And then you start seeing Bagnaia's bike smoking.
So it was the most exciting, boring race I think I have ever watched, because talk about building tension, right? Because he's struggled all season. He's finally having a good race. Now the bike is smoking and you're like, oh, it's 10 laps. Oh, it's still smoking. It's 8 laps. Oh, can it do 5 laps? And then you're like, I'm guessing it might not be anything too serious but you're still just like, is it just like some overflow was plugged? Is there just a little bit of oil in the airbox? Because it seemed to only happen when he was turning to the right and accelerating out of right-hand turns is when you would really see it. Like, oh, maybe it's just oil where it shouldn't be, kind of a thing. But holy cow, did it build tension. And like my wife and I are edge of our seats. She's a massive Pecco fan. Pecco is her guy. And she,
when I got really nervous watching the race for him, because I thought this is the most unfair thing ever for poor Pecco. When I saw the race direction was in the Ducati garage talking to
Gigi.
Gigi.
Oh, they're gonna flag him, and you're like, no.
And I was like, oh, Gigi, you have to sell the heck out of this, man. You've got to convince them that this was by design. Like you gotta.
We put too much oil in this sump. Yeah. That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's just a little blow by.
I had learned later that this was a new engine for this round. They had just opened up this engine, unsealed this engine.
They only get like 6 engines out of a year, and they usually save the fresh engines for faster tracks. And
he has one more brand new engine, but he can't open it until 2 rounds from now. I can't remember the rules exactly, but
it's so complicated.
Yeah, but this was supposedly a fairly new engine. So you think, well, is it just a bad engine, or because it was only pumping out. It was only puffing smoke out of the lower exhaust. So there's 2 exhaust pipes. The one on the tail comes off the back 2 cylinders, and the one by the foot comes off the front 2 cylinders. So it was only pumping off the front 2. So you have to assume, well, it's either a bad piston ring or somehow a seat is leaking oil by, or it could just be a breather hose and it's just somehow dumping a little bit of oil into the airbox and it's dripping into those front cylinders. Who knows? But yeah, it was only coming out of those 2, which was reassuring a little because I was like, well, if it's just the front 2, that probably means they're just burning oil, not leaking oil, not causing an actual issue for the track. But yeah, talk about intense. And I was so nervous for him. But anyway, he finally brought it home and got the win that he deserved.
And we didn't even see him. We didn't even see him like roll into the, because everybody was looking at Marquez. And then they interviewed him. And, I love Pecco because he really is a gentleman. And they ask him, how was your race? Did you know about the impending doom? And he goes, I don't want to take anything away from Marquez. This is his moment.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, you are too good of a guy.
Yeah,
you are really a great guy.
Class act, for sure.
Let's talk about who came in third, because that was oh so awesome.
Yes. So Mir gets third on the Honda. He was also on the podium in the sprint race on a bike that had you at the beginning of the season, you're like, well, this thing is an absolute hunk of, like, it's the worst bike on the track, somehow worse than the Yamaha, you'd think. And suddenly he's bringing it home as a podium and consistent and looked sharp. He looked good. I was so happy for him. He's had a very dark period as well since he won his championship. Basically, I think this was the first podium he's had since he was on a Suzuki.
Right. And he's had a dark shadow over his, let's not forget, he's a world champion, but he's had a shadow over it because it was the COVID championship. So it wasn't all the round, like it was a weird year. And someone's like, well, did he really earn it? And I mean, I believe he did. You won it. I mean, that's
nobody else did.
Nobody else did. Right. Yep. And so it delighted me to see, him smile. Because again, like, he has the reputation of being very kind, like really one of the mellower guys in the paddock. Nobody has a bad thing to say about Mir, Yeah. And so again, I was just delighted. And, he may have had the unfair advantage that's Honda's track. Honda built that track. I'm sure that bike has, infinite numbers of miles around that track. Who cares? So what? I'm awesome.
Yeah.
Like, I was so thrilled. Yeah, for sure. He deserved it, especially with as many times as he's been taken out this year.
And it was interesting because so this track it was funny because on the last podcast we talked about, we both like this track for some reason, but it almost never has great racing unless it's wet.
No, but see, some of my favorite races have happened here.
There's not a lot of great, but if you go back, there's not a ton. It's not like
it is because the weather's bad and there is wet.
There's very few dry races that are really exciting at Motegi. It's not like a Phillip Island or a Mugello where it sort of the track itself kind of creates good racing. But it's an interesting one. You mentioned earlier it's a lot like Spielberg in Austria in that there's really heavy hard braking. The odd thing about Motegi is that the hard braking, almost all of it is very straight up and down. And so you're very much braking at the limit of everything. And that's why the lap times are so tight here, is because with the electronics and with ride heights and things like that, everybody gets through the turning part of the corner, which is not much at this track, and gets back onto the throttle very well. And so all you can do is make up incremental amounts of time on the hard braking in a straight line. But the interesting thing with hard braking in a straight line is you're very limited by the physics of what's happening, because you can only brake so hard before it's completely pitched up on its nose and you have to back off the brake anyway. What I wanted to get to was Acosta, who I thought was extremely exciting and aggressive, and he was fun to watch in all the races, or in the sprint and in the race. But in the race, he fought as hard as he could, and then just started going backward. Was
it his front tire? Because it seemed like his front tire started giving away.
I think the rear tire on that KTM, I think it does not manage rear tires well. That's my impression. He had that moment when he basically completely blew. I think it was turn 5. It was one of the hard braking zones, kind of downhill, and he just. On the race, you're basically watching the onboard of, I think, Alex Marquez, who's behind him, and they're going in, and then you just see Acosta zing into the distance, and you're like, Because for a second I thought Alex, who you're on board with, is having an issue. And then you see Acosta just sail off into the gravel. You're like, oh no, he's having an issue.
Yeah, my wife said, did he forget to brake? Did he forget to go to the brakes?
All I can figure is either, because then when they showed the replay, you see him kind of like grab at the front brake lever. I wonder if he got enough head shake that it knocked the pads back.
Right.
And then when he went for it, there was no brake there. Right. So if you're not aware, effectively, if you get a really nasty, violent head shake and it shakes the bars a couple of times, the force will actually push the brake pads into the calipers and off of the rotor. So then when you first pump the lever, the pressure, all you're really doing is pushing the pads back to the rotor, not against the rotor yet. So he had to take like a second or third stab basically at that lever before he finally had brake force. But the margins are so tight, is too late. He'd already sailed off.
That's happened to you in a race, hasn't it? It happened to me once years ago on a crappy SV650. You're like,
yeah, and you actually will get used to, not you never get used to it. It's always terrible. But if you get a really bad one, if you have time to think about it, you will just give it a little drag to see like, ooh, is there a brake there? I hope there's brake there. But yeah, and I think in this moment, their margins are so slim, there's no room to check. You just have to assume it's going to work. And it didn't for him, unfortunately. But I think what's more interesting is the KTMs tend to, so they had a tough weekend. I think Acosta rode over his head and rode over the bike quite a bit to do what he did, because all the other KTMs were miles back. The KTM is interesting, though, in that it seems like it is worse when the bike is upright, vertical for braking, than it is braking on an angle, which is a really odd thing, because typically all of us humans, all of us mortals, you can brake much harder when you're upright than once you start leaning. We all have to give away some. And I think it's an interesting phenomenon with that KTM bike. And so I've been thinking about what causes this, or why is this? And now I'm not at KTM. I don't know actually what's going on or what's causing this. My hunch is it has to do with the frame that they run, or potentially the front end, because they're the only ones who don't use Öhlins forks. They use WP suspension, their own in-house brand. And then they're also the only one that uses a steel trellis frame, not an aluminum frame. My guess is they've designed the frame to have a lot of lateral flex. And in trying to give it, and so the difference between longitudinal flex versus lateral would be as the bike is leaned on its side, it's able to bend and bow, which allows the wheels to kind of turn in or turn out and adjust and track better. And it helps the tires basically find more grip when it's leaned over. But then the balance is you actually want quite a bit more longitudinal flex. So if the bike is straight up and down, nose to tail, you don't want the chassis to flex a lot. I think my hunch is they've designed so much lateral flex in that they actually get a lot of longitudinal flex as well that they haven't tuned out. And that's partially why they struggle so much on these hard straight line braking, is I think basically the chassis is flexing too much and it's getting really squirrely. And that's why you see these KTMs getting so misshapen and out of line on braking. Excellent to watch, very entertaining. But I think it holds them back a little bit because the chassis just isn't staying in line well enough to really dig the tire in and find the grip like the other bikes can. So it's interesting, and it's one of those, with any of these design problems, especially race bikes, everything's a compromise. To get more of this, you have less of this, or vice versa. I think that's where KTM's at right now with that chassis.
So I just want to, for our listeners, an episode or two ago, we were talking about the Yamaha with the inline 4 and how the V4 has to be lower in the chassis. So there was a really fantastic interview with Jack Miller. And he was talking about, and apparently Jack Miller, I didn't know this about him, but since we're talking about Jack Miller, we got to mention one of our biggest demographics is Sydney, Australia. So Sydney, Australia, we see you.
Yeah.
So hello, Sydney, Australia. Thanks for tuning in. But he did a really fantastic interview where he was talking about the problems that Yamaha was having. And he talked about how and you mentioned this before Jack Miller confirmed it, that one of the big problems they're having is the swing arm pivot is too high with the inline four, that they can't get the swing arm pivot low enough. So to lend credence to your hunch, you were right about the chain issue. You were right about the Yamaha handling issue and the V4 need to be lower in the chassis because that allows you to put the swing arm pivot lower because in line with where the front sprocket is and all that other stuff. So we should listen to what Brian has to say.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, so I think maybe a week after we did that podcast, Miller's interview came out and I listened to it and it was like vindicating, of course. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's exactly what I said. It is always entertaining to listen to Jack talk about kind of anything. He's the Aussie, no BS, kind of just the way that they go about speaking about things. It's just, I love the tone of it. I like the way that he speaks. It's very clear, but not, I don't think Jack Miller could lie to you if he had to.
Well, and what was really great about that interview too is not only just like the candid honesty, was that he's obviously a student in how the motorcycle handles, that he approaches it as, I want to understand this better. He's not coming in saying the swing arm pivot's too high or too low. He asks the engineer, why is it doing this? And if they make a change, he tries to figure. And so I think that it's made him, I think he has the potential to be one of the best test riders anybody has ever had because he has this depth of understanding and comprehension of this unbelievably complicated little machine. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't listened to that interview, go find that interview with Jack Miller. The audio was terrible, but it was worth listening to.
I noticed that. I was so excited for that interview and I listened to it and I was like, come on, dude. And then I was like, we've been getting bitched at about our audio quality. So, okay, I guess I understand. So.
Right. Yeah. Because I had to turn it up way loud and to try to, like, I almost wanted to run it through like an AI thing to clean up the audio so I could hear it. But he had some really fascinating things to say about the dynamics of the motorcycle. But speaking of Yamaha, they broke a chain.
The most bizarre thing, I don't know what's going on with chains right now. I think this was a similar issue. I think this is a similar issue that they're running into, that KTM ran into. Yamaha does run a chain guide, but I still think it's this situation where they're running these bikes with crazy long swing arms and they're getting lots of extra flex and the ride height device makes the chain, it's slack like a motocross bike, basically, in order to compensate for how much the swing arm actually travels. And I think at Motegi is another one of these tracks where they tend to run really long wheelbases because there's so much big straight line braking that they're looking for every ounce of stability they can get out of the thing. And I think he's just another victim of it. I'm sure he got out onto the rumbles at just the right lean angle, just the right force, and just hit the rumbles, and it just snapped the chain. And it's just another reason to be, we can celebrate Marquez winning the championship. I think we will all celebrate when ride height devices go away.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah, and I'm really tired of the Michelin front tire.
Yeah.
Like, we need a better front tire. We also had one of the most dramatic crashes we've seen in a while in the sprint race.
Oh.
And that another
come on, Martin.
poor Martin. So like you watch that. I'm really before I give you my take on it. Well, let's just say what happened, and then I want to hear your take on it. That in the start of the sprint race, he dove to the inside, was coming up the inside, lost control of the bike, took out Bezzecchi, who was also performed fantastic this weekend, and someone else with him, but the third person didn't fall. They were able to rejoin the race, but took out both factory Aprilias in the sprint, and Martin ended up with a broken collarbone.
A smashed collarbone. I saw the imaging of it on Instagram later that he had posted, and it is a broke collarbone.
Oh. So will he be back next week? Collarbones?
They'll plate it. He probably, that's the one of the tough things is it's always tough to break a bone like that. Collarbone, if you're going to break a bone, it's the bone to break typically, because I've broken a collarbone, and once they're plated, it's
then you'll
sore.
break a scapula.
Yeah, it's sore, but you can kind of get going pretty quick. The problem though is he broke it at the first of 3 flyaways, and it's back to back to back. And so it's going to be a hard go to try to come back. And he also has kind of less to come back for, right? I mean, he's nowhere near any kind of championship standing.
Yeah, like when he does like top 10 or top 12, you're like, right on.
Yeah. So is he going to come? My guess is he misses the rest of the flyaways. We might see him back when they go to Valencia, is my guess. But I think
What a rough year. All right, so give us your take as a racer. What happened? What was going on there?
All right. So the first thing, I will give him some slack. Motegi's first turn is a tough first turn on any track because all of the bikes arrive to a really hard, tight braking zone in a fairly short distance. It's one of the, other than the track that they had just gone to, what was the new track that they went to?
Oh God, Balaton.
Balaton. Other than the Balaton Park, which seems like they designed the first track because they wanted crashes, this is about as bad, not that bad, but it's pretty bad because it's a really tight corner and everyone kind of necks into a very tight spot without enough time to spread apart. And so and now with the launch devices that they run, everybody gets an amazing start. There's always going to be these incidents that happen. Watching the replay though, it's like Martin just kind of took his brain out for a second. And he went to the inside, which is the right thing to do, and you have a right to do it, but you can't brake like you're going to get to the apex on that line normally. He was never going to make that corner, ever, from that line with that speed. So he had kind of doomed himself early, and then he's on the inside and everyone's outside of him. And it's unfortunate that he took out anybody, but the way that was set up, he was always at least one person was always going to pay the price. And it's just absolute terrible luck that it was Bez. So I guess the Aprilia's taking out the Aprilia's. I guess, for a team to do that to themselves, it's unfortunate, but it's really unfortunate for Bez because I think he could have been a good competitor for the sprint race.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well,
I'm glad he didn't get hurt.
And I'm glad nobody got hurt. And it's racing is exciting. And I think part of why it's exciting is because to quote Simon Crafar, it's not a game played on the grass. There are real consequences. And, we mentioned this in past podcasts too, that these guys are all riding with some sort of injury or pain or soreness all the time. And so you hate to see the crashes, but you're also, when you do see them, they're terrifying because someone could get hurt, right? When that crash happened and Bez was kind of walking away with his head down, you could see Martin was hurt, and you're like, oh my,
yeah,
oh but we've seen so many of these violent crashes. Like back to Marquez, I remember watching the crash that shattered his arm.
Yep.
That was a violent, terrifying, unbelievable crash, and you're just like, duh, it's. Formula One crashes are kind of but they're in the tube and whatever, and you just hope the car doesn't catch on fire, right?
Yeah.
But when the motorcycle crashes and you're seeing a human form, not to get too morbid, but I watched the race when Simoncelli was hit. I watched that live, and you're like that was horrifying, and so, yeah, it's a game, but it has real consequences, and maybe that's why we love it,
Yeah, I think because it all matters, I guess, right?
It doesn't, and it does. It doesn't matter, but everything's on the line for it. Yeah. And maybe that's the joke, the wooden leg joke that Bez was making, right? With that movie, the three men and a wooden leg, that these guys are carrying this piece of art across Italy and all these things for something that ultimately doesn't matter. They put everything online for something. And maybe maybe he's the philosopher that we assume that Zarco is.
I think this is the second podcast where you have built up Bez's philosophical chops. When I kind of think he's a bit more of a screwball, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he does have very deep
reading way
thoughts.
Too much into it. It's
I like where you're going.
I watched a science fiction or a goofy. What was that movie? Battleship. I was like, that movie was amazing. I was like, what were you on? That movie it was the stupidest movie.
You established, you gave it meaning, and I like that.
Maybe that's it. Maybe I read too much into things.
Yeah.
That's fair.
Speaking of ride height devices, so let's come back to Bagnaia for a second. So I think I had multiple friends text me and say, what's going on? How is Bagnaia winning? How is he doing so well? And he was doing well from Friday morning. He set a new motorcycle track record. It's the first person into the 45s, I think, on an official lap. I think Marquez technically did a 45, but it got canceled from last season. Regardless, he's got the fastest official lap ever around this track. And had you saw him in Misano, which is his backyard, and that's his track, and he looked terrible. And all of a sudden, a switch gets flipped, right? So everyone's going, "What happened? What did they do? Did he get hypnotized? Like how? Like what happened? How did it get fixed?" So what I know, and I don't know all of this, but what I've understood is they had the test in Misano the Monday after the race weekend. That was the race weekend where we saw Casey Stoner in the Ducati pits talking and working with Bagnaia and the crew chief and the team almost the whole time. And I guess it is the rider coach, and I'm forgetting his name. He's and Casey Stoner were on track watching all the riders. And they basically came back and reported to the crew chief and to Ducati what they were seeing, and it basically completely backed up what Bagnaia has been saying pretty much all season, was this issue that he has with coming into the corners. And so it seems like what they wound up doing, at least what I've read online, again, grain of salt, we'll see how true this is, that they were able to revert back to the 2024 rear ride height device, and with that, the 2024 swing arm. Now, when you look at the bikes in the pits, I can't tell you one from the other. They all look the same to me, the swing arms. But and I think the swing arm matches with the ride height device. I think they're kind of paired. But I guess this ride height device, the way it deploys, and I'll talk a bit more about ride height devices, but I guess the way it works just gives him a better, more consistent, reliable feeling when he's breaking into these hard corners. And that's what gives him some of this confidence that he's had this weekend. The things about this is, one, if this is true, what took them so long? Why are we 3/4 of the season in and your two-time world champion has been saying this isn't working, and you just keep pressing on and not just giving him the old version that did work? And so either Ducati said, no, the engineers know best. You just ride the bike. We'll tell you what we're doing here. Or it's all just placebo. And by putting on the old stuff, Bagnaia was like, yep, I can go fast now. And that is all it took. Either way, it's worked. I think it's fascinating that it either speaks to the fragility, I guess, of some of these riders, that just knowing that it's the old stuff, he sort of allowed himself to go fast again, or that the engineers at Ducati are still Ducati engineers and are still saying, no, I know what your feedback is. I'm still going to do what we're going to do.
There is a lot to unpack from that story, assuming that it's true. I love that we solved the front end feel with the swing arm. And, we talk a lot about the complexity of these little simple machines and how everything's connected, and they are unbelievably complicated for how simple they are. That seems to underpin that really elegantly. Just the way the ride height device deploys the swing arm changes how the front end feels so that he can brake better. Nobody would have ever guessed that. You can see the Ducati engineers going, there's no way.
That's not the problem.
Yeah, there's no way that's the problem. But I also love, because I am a huge Casey Stoner fan, I love that he could look at it and say something to get Ducati to listen, right? To kind of solve the problem, because Casey Stoner is like, Jack Miller is kind of the modern Casey Stoner, unbelievably analytic, unbelievably thoughtful, and everything. Like, he really understands. And for him to kind of like look at it and go, oh yeah, maybe try this kind of a thing. It's a great story. I wish we would know the real version, because they always hide this from us. It's like the oil smoke issue. They're never going to tell us what was actually going on. Well,
there's a great bit. So, when they're the last few years, they've done better. MotoGP has done a better job of putting cameras around the riders to catch semi-candid moments the riders know there's a camera, so you're never going to get a full story. But when they before they go up on and do the podium celebration, they're in the back watching a video, kind of replaying highlights from the race. And then the three of them just talk about their experience in the race. Anyway, they're in the back area watching this replay. And this is the first time Bagnaia really gets to see how much smoke his bike was putting out. And as he's watching this, Marc's kind of teasing him because he's like, I was terrified because I thought I was going to crash. I thought you like, are they going to black flag you? What's happening? And apparently Gigi is in the area as well with them because he's going to go and do the podium. And Bagnaia turns to Gigi and he goes, Gigi, what was that? What was going on? And Gigi goes, oh, not here. Because he knows there's a camera. And she's like, yeah, I can say, but not here. And I was like, oh, that's perfect, Gigi. Like, he'll never tell you anything that matters. But the same thing with this. Like, this little, is this true or not story that I'm telling about the rear height device? We'll never know any more than what I just told you. We will never know. They'll never tell us. You'll never read it. They won't talk about it.
I want to believe it just because I love the irony of we solved the front end feel with the swing arm.
Yeah.
That, to me, that's motorcycling in a nutshell, right?
So I want to talk about it for a second. What's interesting, so this rear ride height device, just so everyone's on the same page, the rider has a lever that they flip. There's a whole other part about how they actually activate the ride height device. We're not going to get into that for a second. But basically what happens is as they're accelerating out of a corner, the rear end is allowed to drop lower than what the suspension travel would normally allow it to do. What it's effectively doing is if you look at your bike that has a linkage system for the rear shock to activate, there's a little triangle piece typically, and then there's a thing that we call a dog bone. And as soon as you see it, you'll know which one the dog bone is because it looks like a dog bone. The rear ride height device is effectively that dog bone has a hydraulic system in it that allows it to lengthen and then shorten, which allows the swing arm to drop or droop essentially further into the frame. That device is a wildly sophisticated, extremely complicated, very expensive mountain bike dropper post. That's really what it is. It's under a certain amount of pressure when you release the valve, it allows it to lengthen under the load of it and then shorten and lock in place. But it's just like any other kind of shock type of contraption where there's damping involved, so they control how quickly it extends or how quickly it contracts. And apparently, either stiffness of the device or the shape of the device, who knows what it is, but something about the way that it is undeploying, I don't know what you want to call that, but basically when it shortens back up when they're in the braking phase and it puts the bike back up in the high ride height configuration.
Yeah, because they are backwards. Shortened would raise the rear bike. Lengthened would lower the rear. Yeah. So
it's complicated, but the gist of it is effectively when he is going to the brakes and the rear end squatted, and then they go to the brakes, and that is what unloads the rear end. And then the rear ride height device shortens again and locks in place. Something about how the 2025 version was doing that in conjunction with the swing arm was causing instability for him. So that means either it was unloading too quickly or it was unloading in a way that felt unnatural and the rear end was getting very light and vague for him. It didn't feel how he wanted it. He just didn't have the confidence on the front end. My guess, if I had to guess, it is something about how it was unloading was too slow. It was basically, so as he lifted.
Interesting. I would have thought it would have been the other way.
And I could be wrong. So imagine, think about a front fork for a second. If you think about the rebound phase of a fork, that is, I'm riding along and there's a pothole. There's a dip, a negative space in the ground, not a bump, a dip. How quickly can that front wheel drop down to track with the dip? Okay, think about that. Now on the rear end, if I'm riding along like this, because the rear end's dropped, when I go to the brakes and it lifts up, if that can't drop down fast enough, the rear basically, as I go to the brakes, it lifts into the air and comes kind of disconnected from the ground.
Oh, it could overload the front end a little bit.
Yeah, and so basically it's almost too light, the rear end, so it's not giving him the braking he wants. And then it does extend, and then it does give him the grip that he's expecting, but it's maybe not quite a natural
unsettled
feeling.
It was like an abrupt thing as opposed to something that's maybe damped a little bit.
Yeah. So now, whether it's actually moving too slowly, or maybe it's moving too fastly and I'm completely backward, or it just isn't what he expects. He was going into corners without getting the support of the rear end slowing him down like he was used to or like he wanted, and you'd see him, he'd come into the corners and he had to brake super early in order to make the corner because he couldn't get enough help from the rear. Or if he tried to really push, he'd start tipping in and he'd have to go wide because he wasn't getting the help on braking from the rear tire like he wants. So I think it's fascinating that, to your point, there's something in the rear end is what was screwing up his braking. But maybe it's mind-blowing that Ducati took this long to just put the old thing back on and let him try it.
And it's also, right, if you think about it, your theory makes sense because Pecco really has spent almost his entire MotoGP career on a Gigi Dall'Igna bike. And Gigi Dall'Igna, the team boss for Ducati, built the bike around the rear tire that is extraordinary and a front tire that is the opposite of that. So Pecco has probably been trained to use the rear brake more than anybody else, more than us, right? Because we're all using our front brake significantly more. So perhaps by what you're talking about and losing that rear end feel, losing the ability to use his rear brake could have completely unsettled him because he spent the last however many years riding a bike that needs the rear brake to do anything. Whereas Marquez came from Honda, and Honda was not like that. Honda was built around the front tire. Honda and Bridgestone have had this long-standing relationship, and Bridgestones are known for their amazing front tire. Even when they were in the series, it was the front tire was phenomenal, and the back tire was the one that had all the problems. So you can see Marquez being able to compensate quicker and easier than Pecco, just based on their history with where they came from. So it's a fascinating little thing that the ride height device.
Yeah.
I can't wait till they're gone. I really can't wait till they're gone.
Yeah. I am 100% with you on that one. I do want to make quick mention of in MotoAmerica, Cam Beaubier. He just sealed his 6th Superbike American MotoAmerica championship, which is fantastic. He, I think, now is the winningest rider in AMA history.
That's fantastic. And his name is so fun to say.
Cam Beaubier, yeah. Funny story. So I've bought race bikes over the years. At one point, I bought a used bike that was actually his brother's bike because we got the title from the original owner to the second owner, then to me. And Beaubier it was his dad's name on there anyway on the title. And learned later that it was his brother's practice bike that he had. But anyway, yeah, Cam Beaubier won the AMA Superbike Championship, so I'm excited for him.
Yeah, we did get some feedback that people want us to mention other race series. This is going to be hard for me. I run a YouTube channel. I barely have time to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
MotoGP is my indulgence. It's going to be a challenge for me to try to keep up on other races.
Well,
another series.
The thing about the MotoAmerica that I think is interesting is what's happening for next season. So I'll talk about this for a second. For the last, or maybe 5 years or so, they've ran a class called Stock 1000. Stock 1000 it is a class that is intended to give privateers a place to race on the big stage. It is much more limited bike modifications. It is actually a limited schedule. Stock 1000 would not go to all of the rounds. Typically, it would go to a handful of them, 6 or 8 of them or 6 of them usually instead of 9. So it was intended for the privateer to get to be on the big stage, get to go race MotoAmerica, but not have to spend the types of money you have to spend to go do a true superbike project. Next year, 2026, they are getting rid of Stock 1000. They are instead running a sort of cup class, they're referring to it as. So it is still a slightly more limited spec, but they will be gridded and they will run with the superbike class. So they'll be on track at the same time as the superbikes, but it's kind of a junior class running at the same time. It kind of reminds me of when MotoGP would run CRT bikes. Do you remember this?
Oh, I forgot about the CRT bikes. That was something I haven't even...
Dark times.
Man.
Dark time. No,
completely forgot about the CRT
It was
bikes.
following up from the 2008-2009 kind of economy crisis where a lot of these teams were like, hey, we're broke. I can't buy a satellite Yamaha. I can't buy a satellite Honda. And so to fill the grid, Dorna came up with this idea of all the factories had to prepare and offer a CRT version. And I wish I could remember what CRT stood for. Maybe one of you in the comments can help me out. I can't remember now, but basically it was a detuned, watered down version of a superbike effectively to go racing. So it still had a prototype chassis. There was really two CRT bikes I recall. It was the Honda, which was basically they took the Honda from a few years ago that they were racing as a GB bike. I think they put spring valves in it instead of pneumatic. Made other things a little cheaper. And, Jack Miller raced one, Nicky Hayden raced one for a while. But they were, and Aprilia did this too. Aprilia actually, the RSV4 engine, I think, was in the CRT bikes. It was just a clear notch down from the actual GP bike. Anyway, bit of a tangent, but it was to fill out the grid and put them all together. Because in MotoAmerica, the true superbike class is slim. Because as much as I want to be positive about all these things that MotoAmerica has done and is doing, we are not seeing the attention that it needs. It's definitely not the heyday of Matt Mladen and Ben Spies, where there was true audiences and true factory support and so forth. It is much less than that now, but the bikes are definitely not less to run. The teams are not spending less. And so you wind up with just a very, very small group who can even put together a superbike program. So they've come up with this stock 1000 idea. Now it's this cup idea, and they're basically putting all these privateers on track with them. So I guess the upside of this is these privateers now are probably going to get a bit more airtime because they're on track when everybody else is tuned in and watching superbikes. But they will be a very visible, clear step down in speed and overall performance. And their cost is going to go through the roof compared to what they've been doing. So I know a few guys who do MotoAmerica in the Stock 1000 class, and they're having to budget substantially more money for next year already, just in order to make all of the rounds, build the bikes how they need to. It's a tough go. I get why they're doing it, but this is a tough spot to put those guys in.
Well, and I can see potential speed differential issues on some of these smaller tracks of privateer with some of these more seasoned.
There's definitely going to be some lapped riders for sure.
Yeah, and that always, blue flags, there's ways to mitigate that, but stuff happens when you're going 150 miles an hour.
Yep. So I'm not sure how I feel about it. I think more than anything, I'm a little bit bummed that that's kind of the state of American superbike racing right now.
Yeah, it's so sad to watch this sport that we love so much struggle.
Yep.
Our good friend Greg, who works for Aprilia, he talks about how, like, even 2008, 2009, 2010, which doesn't seem that long ago for me, America led the motorcycle industry worldwide. Everybody, they were making motorcycles for the American market. Now we're a footnote in the motorcycle industry. And if it wasn't for adventure bikes, that's what Americans are buying now, are the thing like the Transalp that's sitting behind you. And yeah, I mean, this is probably a topic for another podcast because I think we're getting close to the end of this. And this is something we're actually planning on talking about over the winter in depth. But the future of our sport, where is it going? How can we save it? How do we get kids excited about it? So I think we'll end there. But on that thought, if you have thoughts, dear viewer, dear listener, wherever you choose to partake, let us know. What are your thoughts? How would you save this industry that is struggling? We know we're nutters. We know we're crazy. We know we're obsessed with this thing that doesn't make much practical sense for how we live our lives. But how do we get people excited about it? We'd love to hear what you have to say. Ryan, any other final thoughts?
No, that's it. Great episode.
All right, guys. Thanks so much. If you made it this far, you're a fan. So I'm not going to ask you to click like and subscribe because you're probably already here.
And
if you heard any noise, we are in Utah. We get about 4 weeks a year, 2 weeks in the spring and 2 weeks in the fall, where it's either not bitter cold or
blazing hot.
blazing
Yeah.
hot. So we have the doors open and we have this nice evening breeze coming through here. So if you heard that pickup truck go by or kids screaming in the background, that's what was going on.
It was worth it.
It was worth it for us because it's really lovely in the
Yeah.
garage right now. All right,
Awesome.
guys, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.
See ya. Thanks.